Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Butterfly Living's interview with one of the great authors that we have been sharing since 2019. And I found out today we have hit 150 countries. What an amazing thing to spread the good news of Christ. And today I have my friend Sarah S. Brown. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here, and we are going to talk about when life doesn't go as planned, finding hope after disappointment.
Mhm.
And when I was thinking about your article and reading it, I thought, I think I talk about disappointment every day with someone. Disappointments roll in all the time. Of course, some are little and some are giant. So you start your article with a pretty big disappointment, a situation that was very different than you planned. Can you share a little about this time and what motivated you or inspired you to write about it?
Sure. Well, I have always been a planner. I was the one from a very young age with a vision board with the house and the white picket fence and the two kids and church on Sundays and the ball field on Wednesdays. And one Friday afternoon in the summer, several years ago, my husband at the time uttered six words that changed everything. He said, "I've put our family in jeopardy." And
Mm,
in an instant, everything that I believed about myself and who I was, and everything that I thought about the future that would come to be was undone and just seemingly unraveled. And I remember in those moments wanting to just cry out to God and say, God, this is not the life I planned. And as a believer, I had prayed for my family and for my marriage. And so it felt like a very confusing time.
mhm,
And if I'm honest, I felt broken in that
mm,
moment. And over time, God has shown me that really He was present with me in the midst of all of it. And that's part of why I want to share my story, is because sometimes I think our vision can become clouded by our circumstances. And I want to be an encouragement to others. And I know that even though my experience may not be the same as one of your listeners, many of us stand before God with something in our lives that wasn't on our vision board. And we want to call out to Him, Lord, what what now? We need to seek him for that guidance. But the beautiful thing that I have come to learn about all of that is that our unplanned seasons do not mean unfinished, that God is not done um, with our stories, that he is present in every part of it, in those moments where we feel broken, and in those moments where we're growing, and in those moments that he brings about the beauty from it all.
Oh, I love that. And I love that you shared that with us. It's such a big disappointment, and
Mhm.
many will relate with that. So thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Because disappointment happens, like I said at the beginning, often. What have
Mhm.
you learned about grieving? So I think you have to acknowledge before you can release a disappointment, you really have to acknowledge it. You have to grieve it. Then you can move on to hope. What have you learned about that?
I mean, exactly what you just said, honestly, that grieving really is an act of honesty. It's acknowledging that something was lost. Whether you're grieving a relationship, as I was, or a loss of some kind, um, or a career shift, there's grief involved in all of that. And so it's an honest act. And for me, I saw that the hardest part of the grief wasn't necessarily even losing what I had, but for me, it was also grieving what I thought would be.
Mm,
So the plan that I had made for my life, and something that I had held so tightly to the chest, and where God was saying, "You've got to surrender this to me." You know, I've also learned that you have to let yourself grieve before you can truly hope again.
mm,
Because if you skip past the grief, you can end up holding on to things that are disguised, grief in disguise, I should say, like your bitterness and comparison. I struggled with that a lot, comparing my
mhm.
life to the lives of others whose plans were looking like the one I wish had played out for myself. And so um, that grief has to be processed. And it really needs to be processed in the presence of God, because that then creates space for that hope to take root in your life.
Oh, that's so good. We could talk about that. I like that. So the hope can take root. That's
Mhm.
just wonderful. How did you realize that God was meeting you in that grief? Did you have a moment or some moments where, so you're grieving? I love what you said about comparison. I think that's a trap that you think you're grieving and then you're looking around and seeing, wait, it worked out that way for them.
Mhm.
So, where did you meet God in this so that you could process and move on?
I wish I could say that grief that I met God in those moments and suddenly I didn't feel the grief anymore, but it really was a process over time. And it
Hmm.
started with a mission trip I was on where I was pulling weeds with some other women, and we came to name the weeds as the things in our lives that were painful or that had taken root that weren't a part of God's plans for us. And this just so happened to be a few months after everything had come to light in my life. And I actually watched those weeds burn in a burn pile.
Wow.
And it was in those moments, yeah, it was in those moments of watching the smoke rise that I first felt like, okay, he is here, he is with me. And I was reminded of the promise that he gives beauty for ashes. And so I clung to that. And then honestly, just spending time in the word. I
Hmm.
didn't know what to pray, so I would turn to the Psalms often. In Psalm 34, it says that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. And I clung to that and I prayed and begged for him to let me feel his presence in those moments. Um, Another passage that really stuck with me as well was in Hosea, where uh, he says, I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her, and I will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. I hope I'm saying Achor right. That's how I read it. But which valley of Achor means trouble. And so if God
Mm.
could take that valley of trouble and turn it into a doorway for hope, then what could he do in my life with this unplanned season?
Beautiful. I love those two. I'm such a visual person. I love the burning the weeds. I'm going to have to go pull and burn some weeds. And then I love the two scriptures
Hmm.
because it's practical. We
Hmm.
can't just say, I'm going to move through this grief. We really do have to be intentional.
Right,
And so those
right.
are two ways you were very intentional. And you
Mhm.
wrote this quote, just because growth isn't visible doesn't mean transformation isn't happening. Roots grow underground long before blooms appear on the surface.
Mhm.
Tell us about that. That's a great quote. And it again, your visual, I love all these visuals and the plants and
Mhm.
what led you to write that?
Honestly, it came out of the growth in writing my story in my book, where I talk about that moment I just shared with you about burning the ashes. And at the time I was writing my book, the wildfires were happening out in California.
Mm.
And I just got to thinking, gosh, what happens? How does the earth begin to grow life again after a wildfire? And I was just blown away to discover that there are these seeds that they call fire followers that lie dormant under the ground, sometimes for years, even decades, that will only bloom when the earth is scorched, when it's completely ash. And I have chills thinking about it
I
now,
know, that's so cool.
just how God used that imagery for me to
Mhm.
realize that even though the surface for me felt and looked like ash, like everything had been devastated and burned to the ground, that there was still this new life beginning underneath there. And not only that, that it was part of his plan all along, that it was there and maybe the conditions of my plan unraveling was actually what had to happen in order for those things to begin to grow and bloom, not only within me, but within my life and the beauty that he brought out of it. And so that imagery of a plant, it's kind of ironic because if I'm honest, I am a brown thumb. Like I cannot keep any plant alive. I once bought a basil plant that died before I could even cook the lasagna soup it was for. But
That's great.
but I love that he's then used that image of that seed underground and how it begins to sprout and grow roots. And we can't see it above the surface. We can't see it from our point of view, but God can.
That's
And he is
right.
already doing something beautiful beneath the surface.
I love that. I know so many times you're like, why did this happen to me? And
Mhm.
then years later or months later, you look back and you're like, okay, I get it now.
Mhm.
I had to go through that to get here, or I learned this to help me get here. So I love
Right.
that story. It reminds me in my book, Uniquely Made, I have a Katrina rose which survived a hurricane.
Mm.
Everything was just like the fire, ash, not from fire, but from water. And there
Mhm.
was one rose that was deeply rooted, just like your
Mhm.
quote, that survived. So
Mhm.
tell us, so you've talked about your book. Share
Mhm.
your book, the title, what it's about, where can listeners connect with you?
Sure. So my book is called Even the Ashes Bloom: Finding Beauty When You Feel Broken. And it's really my story, some of what I just shared, but that journey from feeling broken, feeling like life just hadn't turned out the way I expected, through the grief, through the shame I carried as a result of that, and into that season of beauty that God had prepared for me. And so I want it to really be more like I'm holding your hand as you're walking
Mm.
through that yourself. I really believe in the power of us sharing our stories and how we can encourage one another and point one another back to God. And so I hope that's what it will be. It's like an invitation to join me on that journey. The best place to find all the things is at sarahsbrown.com, and that is Sarah with an H. There are links there to all of my socials, some freebies and things like that, and also a link to my book as well, which is available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble online, and Walmart online too. One other quick thing I'll mention, I did start a community for Christian women online. It's called Everbloom Faith Collective, and it's on Facebook. So I would love for any of your listeners to join me there as well. It's free. It's just a way to encourage one another and share testimonies of what God's doing in our lives.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your vulnerability. It takes people being honest and vulnerable to really reach everyone. We
Mm,
don't really help everyone in isolation or when we hold back. So thank you for that, because that
right.
takes courage. And thank you for being here.
Well,
I
thank
will
you.
put Sarah's book in the notes. So thank you. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe. God bless you. Bye, Sarah.